AITA for taking revenge on my 5-year-old niece after she called me a faggot for doing household chores. I have banned her from my house until her parents apologize. Hi everyone. Please bear with me if I make any mistakes in English since it's not my first language. I'm a 29-year-old guy and my wife is 30. Together, we have 2 sons, ages 5 and 3. My wife has a full-time office job, while I work from home with a very flexible schedule. As long as I meet my deadlines and attend a few Zoom calls, nobody minds when I work or how long it takes. This setup has made it easy for me to juggle parenting during the day. My younger sister Barb, 26, and her husband Nick, 30, live nearby and both work full-time jobs. They have a 5-year-old daughter, Tracy, who goes to daycare with my kids. Since my schedule is so flexible, we figured it would make sense for me to handle the daycare pickups and drop-offs for Tracy alongside my own kids. It wasn't a big deal to me. If anything, I liked the idea of my sons spending time with their cousin. Tracy's a good kid, sweet and usually well-behaved, and I thought I was the cool uncle. Most days, I'd bring the kids back to my place after daycare, make them snacks or dinner, and then my sister would come to pick Tracy up in the evening. A few days ago, while the 2 older kids were watching Bluey on TV, I was in the kitchen preparing snacks with my 3-year-old when I suddenly heard shouting. I rushed into the living room to see my son yelling, "My dad's not a girl," while Tracy shot back, "Yes, he is. He's a faggot. That's like a girl." In our language, the word was different, but the offensive meaning and tone were clear. I was completely taken aback. I turned off the TV immediately, sat Tracy down, and explained that the word she used was very offensive. I told her that in our family, we don't use mean words to hurt others, and that she needed to apologize to me. She seemed confused and then added, "But that's what my dad called you, and he's not in trouble." Hearing that made my heart sink. I kept calm and told her that regardless of what her dad said, using that word was wrong and hurtful. I asked her to apologize, which she did, and we had a bit of a talk. She's a great kid, and she listened, but her dad's comments had already left an impact on her. I carefully asked if her parents had said anything else, and, piecing together what I could from a 5-year-old, it seems that Nick had criticized me in front of her. He told my sister that men shouldn't stay at home all day doing chores and childcare, that cooking and cleaning were women's work, and that I wasn't a real man since my wife made more money than I did. I explained to Tracy, as best as I could, that men and women can both work from home or in an office, and that it didn't make anyone more or less of a man or woman based on what they did. I didn't want to dig too deep into adult issues with her, so I left it at that. That evening, I talked to my wife about it, and she was equally upset. We agreed that I should ask Barb and Nick for an apology. I called Barb and told her what happened, hoping she'd understand. Instead, she brushed it off, saying, "It's just a word. Nick doesn't actually dislike you." I told her that it wasn't about whether Nick liked me. It was about him disrespecting me and speaking negatively about me in front of his daughter. I was frustrated that Barb didn't seem bothered by it and wasn't standing up for me. When she told me I was being a drama queen and that I needed to get over it, I lost my patience. I told her that she'd need to pick up Tracy herself from now on, and I hung up. Yes, it was abrupt and rude, but I felt so disrespected by my own family, people I've helped out countless times. My wife agreed that I shouldn't back down until I received a genuine apology. The next 2 days fell on the weekend, so there was no daycare. I expected Barb to reach out, but there was complete radio silence. The absence of any calls or messages made me think she hadn't taken my words seriously, which only fueled my anger. On Monday, when it was time to pick up Tracy for daycare and I didn't show up, the calls started coming. I had already dropped off my own kids and ignored Barb's attempts to reach me. I know it was petty, but after stewing for 2 days, I felt justified in letting her stew for a few hours as well. It felt strangely satisfying. When I finally picked up her call around noon, I was ready to smugly demand my apology so we could move past this, but I didn't get the chance. Barb went off on me, furious that I hadn't picked up Tracy and that she'd been late to work because of it. I calmly reminded her, "I told you I wouldn't be picking her up." "You had 2 days to make other arrangements." She kept yelling, so I hung up. She continued calling and texting me to pick up Tracy from daycare, but I repeated that I wouldn't do it and then stopped responding. When I arrived to pick up my own kids later, Tracy looked at me expectantly, thinking I'd take her too. It broke my heart to leave her behind, but I stayed firm. I gently explained to her that her mom and I were having a disagreement, and I'd pick her up again once we worked things out. Seeing how upset she was hurt deeply. After all, she's only 5, and none of this is her fault, but I couldn't just let it slide. I still felt that I deserved an apology. Later, my mom called, explaining that Barb had asked her to pick up Tracy, which was a struggle for my mom due to her disability. She questioned why I was being so mean to Barb. I explained everything, expecting her support, but instead, she dismissed it with a, "You know how Nick is." I told her that the more I learned about Nick, the less I liked him. I made it clear that if Nick had such disdain for what I did around the house, I wasn't going to keep doing him any favors for free. Mom insisted I was overreacting, but I argued that all I had asked for was a simple apology. Yet everyone preferred this drawn-out mess over just giving me one. Mom urged me to be the bigger man, but I told her I was done and wished her luck with Tracy. That evening, I received a call from Nick himself. Hoping for an apology, I answered. But no, he claimed I was causing Barb distress and wondered how I could do this to my own sister. I shot back, asking how he could speak so poorly about me to his daughter, whom I cared for daily. He dismissed his comments as jokes, claiming it was all in good fun. I told him it was neither good nor fun for me and demanded an apology. Instead, he exploded, calling me a slur and mocking me as a hysterical little girl. I told him to go to hell and hung up, which led to a barrage of calls from both Barb and my mom that I ignored. Barb then texted, accusing me of being petty and making Tracy suffer for it. I replied that Tracy was suffering because her parents were ungrateful and disrespectful. Barb continued to send angry messages, insisting she was at risk of losing her job and calling me cruel to her and our mom. I told her that unless her next text was an apology, I would block her number. It wasn't, so I did. Over the past few days, my mom has continued picking up Tracy, which hasn't been easy for her. Every time I see Tracy at daycare, she tells me she wants to come back to our house, and it breaks my heart. She's not having fun with Grandma, and she misses being with us. It tears me up inside, but I can't just let this go. I feel like caving would only show my family that they can disregard my boundaries without consequence. Yet I love my niece and don't want her to be hurt or resent me. She's an innocent child in all of this. So, am I the asshole? And what do I even do? Edit. Wow, I didn't expect this much support so quickly. Thank you all for your advice and encouragement. Many of you mentioned the possibility that Nick wants Barb to quit her job, and now that you bring it up, it does seem plausible and concerning. Still, I need Barb to realize that that's just how Nick is, doesn't make it acceptable. I worry that my mom won't be able to keep picking Tracy up for long, so I hope Barb will at least talk to me, ideally because she understands my perspective, but even if it's out of desperation. They have a big mortgage and probably can't afford more childcare options. I'll make sure Tracy knows that I love her and none of this is her fault. Thank you all so much for your input. I forced my pregnant girlfriend to terminate after I caught her cheating. Then I broke up with her. AITA? Clara and I, 29M, met 5 years ago at a friend's birthday party. It was one of those nights I almost skipped because I was exhausted from work, but something, or someone, made me stay. Clara walked into the room wearing a bright yellow sundress, her laughter louder than the music. She had this magnetic energy that drew everyone to her, but somehow, she chose to spend most of the evening talking to me. She teased me about my inability to hold a conversation when I first saw her. I was too mesmerized to form a coherent sentence. "Cat got your tongue?" she had joked, and we both burst into laughter. From that moment, I was hooked. Clara was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner. She was smart, funny, and ambitious. She worked as a graphic designer and was passionate about her work. She could spend hours talking about typography and color palettes, and even though I didn't understand half of it, I loved listening to her talk. Her enthusiasm was contagious. One of my favorite things about Clara was her kindness. She had a way of making everyone feel seen and valued. Whether it was a stranger at the grocery store or one of our friends going through a tough time, Clara was always there with a warm smile and words of encouragement. She made me want to be a better person. We started dating a few weeks after that party. Our first date was at a little coffee shop downtown. Clara was nervous and accidentally spilled her latte all over the table. She laughed it off, and so did I. That's one thing I'll always love about her, her ability to find humor in the most embarrassing situations. Over the years, we built a life together. We traveled, cooked meals together, and spent lazy Sundays watching our favorite shows. Every year, we'd celebrate our anniversary by recreating our first date at that same coffee shop. I was certain Clara was the one. I had even started saving up for an engagement ring. I'd already picked out the perfect one, a vintage-style ring with a sapphire center stone because Clara once mentioned how much she loved sapphires. Then came the news that changed everything. Clara sat me down one evening, her hands trembling as she held mine. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. At first, I was stunned. We hadn't been actively trying, but we weren't exactly preventing it either. After the shock wore off, I felt an overwhelming wave of joy. Clara and I were going to be parents. We spent the next few weeks in a bubble of happiness. We started brainstorming baby names. She liked traditional names like Emma and Jack, while I leaned towards something unique, like Aria or Finn. Clara started looking up nursery designs on Pinterest, and I made a spreadsheet of all the baby gear we'd need. I couldn't wait to be a dad. I pictured teaching my kid how to ride a bike, taking them to their first baseball game, and helping them with homework. Clara and I even talked about moving into a bigger apartment to make room for the baby. I was also planning something special for Clara. I wanted to propose before the baby arrived. I pictured a cozy evening at home, just the two of us. I'd cook her favorite meal, spaghetti carbonara, and light some candles. Then, as we were finishing dessert, I'd get down on one knee and ask her to spend the rest of her life with me. Everything felt perfect. I was happier than I'd ever been. But looking back, there were signs I missed. Clara's phone seemed to buzz a lot more often than usual, and she'd always make excuses to leave the room to answer it. I chalked it up to work. Her job could be demanding, and she was always juggling multiple projects. She also seemed a bit more distracted lately. She forgot our dinner plans once, something she'd never done before. When I teased her about it, she laughed and blamed it on pregnancy brain. I didn't think much of it at the time. I trusted Clara completely. She was the love of my life, the future mother of my child, and the person I planned to grow old with. Little did I know, the perfect life I was building with Clara was about to come crashing down. It started with small cracks, subtle changes in her behavior that I brushed off as stress or pregnancy hormones. But those cracks were about to widen into a chasm so deep it would swallow everything I thought I knew about her. For now, I was a man in love, excited for the future and the family we were about to start together. It started small, barely noticeable at first. Clara began coming home later than usual, claiming she had extra deadlines at work. Her phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter or coffee table, was now glued to her hand or tucked away in her bag. When I asked her about it, she laughed it off, saying she was just too tired to deal with anyone but me. I wanted to believe her, so I did. I chalked her changes in behavior up to the pregnancy. I'd read all about the hormonal shifts and mood swings that could come with it, and I told myself this was just part of the process. But something wasn't sitting right with me. One evening we were watching TV and her phone buzzed on the coffee table. The name on the screen made my stomach turn. Elliot. Elliot was Clara's coworker, a guy I had never liked. From the beginning I thought he was too friendly, too familiar with her. He was always leaving comments on her social media posts, little jokes, emojis, things that felt just a bit too personal. Clara had always brushed it off, saying, "Elliot's harmless, babe. He's just like that with everyone." I tried to let it go, but that nagging feeling wouldn't leave me. The next day, while Clara was in the shower, I did something I never thought I'd do. I looked at her phone. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through her messages. Most of them were innocent, work-related exchanges. But then I saw a string of messages that made my blood run cold. Elliot. Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. Clara. Me too. I hate sneaking around, but it's worth it. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My heart was racing and my vision blurred with tears. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Clara, the woman I loved, the woman carrying my child, was cheating on me. I waited until she came out of the bathroom, her hair wrapped in a towel and a smile on her face. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Who the hell is Elliot to you?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. Her smile vanished. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, Clara. I saw the messages. Tell me the truth. She froze, her eyes darting around the room like she was searching for an escape. It's not what you think, she finally said. Then what is it? I demanded. Because it sure as hell looks like you've been sneaking around with him while I've been here, planning our future together. Clara sat down on the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. It just happened, she said, her voice muffled. I didn't mean for it to. I love you, not him. Don't give me that crap, I snapped. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have lied to my face. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she tried to explain. It was the hormones, okay? I've been all over the place emotionally, and Elliot was just there. He listened to me when I felt like you didn't. That's your excuse? I yelled. You cheated because you felt ignored? I've been here for you every step of the way, Clara. I've done everything I could to make you happy, and this is how you repay me? She sobbed harder, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I was too hurt, too angry. Is the baby even mine? I finally asked, the question I'd been dreading since I saw those messages. Clara looked up at me, her face pale. Of course it's yours, she whispered. I swear it's yours. How can I believe anything you say? I asked bitterly. She didn't have an answer. The rest of the evening was a blur of shouting and tears. Clara begged me to forgive her, to stay and work things out for the sake of our baby. But I couldn't even look at her. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. I packed a bag and left, needing space to think. I ended up crashing on my best friend Jake's couch, replaying the night's events over and over in my head. Jake tried to calm me down, but nothing helped. All I could think about was the life I thought I was building with Clara, the future that was now in ruins. Over the next few days, Clara kept calling and texting, pleading with me to come home. She even roped in my family, telling them her side of the story. My parents, ever the traditionalists, urged me to go back to her. She's pregnant, for God's sake, my mom said. You can't just abandon her. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't pretend everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. I couldn't stay with someone who had betrayed me so deeply, no matter how much I loved her. The worst part was the uncertainty. If the baby was mine, I couldn't just walk away. I'd have a responsibility to that child, even if I wanted nothing to do with Clara. But if the baby wasn't mine, the thought made me sick. I knew I had to take control of the situation, but I wasn't sure how. All I knew was that I couldn't let Clara and her lies dictate the rest of my life. Something had to give. The days that followed were pure chaos. I stayed at Jake's, trying to piece together my shattered thoughts while dodging Clara's incessant calls and messages. She bombarded my phone with tearful voicemails, desperate apologies, and promises that she'd never hurt me again. My parents, who had been sympathetic to me initially, began to shift their stance after Clara spun her sob story to them. She made a mistake, my mom argued over the phone. But she's carrying your child, Daniel. You can't just abandon her and the baby like this. What kind of father would you be? The guilt was unbearable, and I found myself teetering on the edge of caving in. If the baby was mine, how could I live with myself knowing I'd left them behind? But then there was the glaring reality of Clara's betrayal, the thought of spending my life tied to someone who had destroyed my trust. Clara wasn't letting up either. One day she showed up at Jake's apartment, pleading at the door with swollen eyes and trembling hands. Danny, please, she begged. I know I messed up, but I love you. I don't want to do this without you. Jake stood between us, his arms crossed. You need to leave, Clara, he said firmly. Just give me 5 minutes, she cried. Daniel, please. This is your baby we're talking about. I sighed, stepping outside to talk to her. She looked so fragile, her usual confidence replaced by a desperation I hadn't seen before. I'll take a paternity test once the baby's born, I said. But we're done, Clara. I can't forgive you for this. Her tears turned to anger. You're such a coward, she spat. Running away instead of facing this like an adult. You think you're blameless? You were so busy with work, so caught up in your own head, you barely noticed me falling apart. That doesn't justify cheating, I snapped. I was planning our future, Clara. I was going to propose, and the whole time, you were sneaking around with Elliot. Her anger crumbled, and she slumped against the wall. I'll do anything, she whispered. Just don't leave me. I stared at her, the woman I once thought I'd spend my life with, and felt nothing but emptiness. Anything? I asked, the beginnings of a plan forming in my mind. She nodded desperately. Then terminate the pregnancy, I said. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. What? If the baby is mine, I'll be tied to you forever, I said coldly. I can't do that. If you want any chance of us working this out, you'll end it. Her face crumpled, and she began sobbing uncontrollably. How can you even ask me to do that? She choked out. It's your child. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, I said. But I can't move forward like this, Clara. Not with this hanging over us. The backlash was immediate. Clara called my parents, who were horrified by my ultimatum. My mom called me a monster, screaming that I was killing her future grandchild. Clara's friends flooded my social media with hateful messages, calling me every name under the sun. But Clara agreed. A week later, she went through with the termination. I didn't go with her. I couldn't bring myself to face it. She called me afterward, her voice hollow and broken. It's done, she said. Now can we fix this? No, I said flatly. She let out a sob. But you said... I said it was the only way I'd even consider it, I cut her off. But I can't forgive you, Clara. We're over. The phone call ended with her screaming abuses at me, and I turned off my phone. The days that followed were a blur of anger and backlash. Clara told everyone what I'd done, painting me as a heartless villain who had forced her to terminate our baby. Even some of my friends turned against me, saying I'd gone too far. You didn't have to do that, Jake said one night. You could have just walked away. She would have roped me in forever, I said bitterly. If the baby was mine, I'd be paying child support for 18 years. If it wasn't, she'd still have a hold over me. I had to end it completely. Not everyone saw it that way. My mom refused to speak to me, and my dad was barely holding back his disappointment. I don't agree with what you did, he said one night. But I understand why you did it. Your mom, she'll come around eventually. But I didn't want to wait for eventually. I packed my bags and left for a 2-week vacation, cutting off everyone except Jake and my dad. I needed space to clear my head, to figure out how I was going to move forward. On the last night of my trip, I sat alone on a quiet beach, the sound of the waves calming my restless mind. I thought about everything that had happened, the choices I'd made, and the fallout that followed. I'd lost Clara. I'd lost my child, if it was even mine. I'd lost friends and family who couldn't understand my decision. But I'd also reclaimed my freedom. As I stared at the horizon, I couldn't help but wonder, did I do the right thing? Was I justified in ending things the way I did? Or was I just as monstrous as everyone said? I guess I'll never know. My sister threw my baby on the floor. That left his head bleeding, giving him concussion. AITA for kicking her out? I am absolutely furious as I write this out. It seems so painfully obvious, but literally everyone keeps telling me that I'm in the wrong, and I feel like I might lose my mind. I'm putting this down because I need an external perspective, because I'm honestly starting to lose it. For some background, my 34 younger sister, 19, has been living with us while attending college since we live close by. We've been covering all her expenses because my husband and I have more stable jobs than either of my parents, and we've saved enough money that it makes more sense for us to support her rather than having my parents do it, who, by the way, helped fund both me and my husband's education when we were in school. In exchange for us not charging her any rent, feeding her, and covering her tuition, all I occasionally ask of her is to help me out with my 22-month-old son. It's never for more than an hour max, and it's mostly so I can cook or clean without him trying to cling to my leg or beg for attention. He loves her, so it's much easier to pass him off to her while I try to get things done. She doesn't mind because I usually pay her around $10 to $15 if she watches him for longer than 15 minutes. Please understand, this is never more than an hour. I know she's busy with her studies and often doesn't want to deal with him, but I always ask if she's okay with it. And when she says she's too busy or just not in the mood, I completely respect that and figure out another way to handle him, like letting him watch some YouTube videos. It's not ideal, but it's better than him crawling under my feet when I'm trying to cook or manage something hot. One thing I've warned her about over and over is not to wear necklaces, bracelets, earrings, or hair clips while she's watching him. Anything that he can pull or grab because he loves to yank on them, which is obviously painful. My husband and I have both tried to teach him not to do it, but being a toddler, it's not easy. He either doesn't understand or finds it funny when we tell him no, and punishments rarely seem to work. We won't spank him, but it's hard to discipline a toddler who just laughs when we try to take things away. 2 days ago, I had to run an errand, and it seemed too much trouble to wake my son up from his nap. I asked her if she could watch him for a bit, and she said yes. I told her it would only take 20 minutes at most. She assured me everything would be fine. Before I left, I noticed she was wearing one of those thin plastic headbands. I warned her that it could be dangerous because of how fragile it was, but she told me she'd take it off if he woke up and keep it out of his reach. When I came back, I heard them both screaming, and my son was crying uncontrollably. I saw my sister holding her ear, yelling at him, while he was lying on the floor, crying. I was livid. I grabbed him and saw that his head was bleeding. I immediately panicked, called 911, and waited for the ambulance to arrive. Once the paramedics showed up and I took a closer look at my sister, I realized she had blood on her ear as well. Both of them were taken to the hospital. It turns out that when my son woke up, the two of them were sitting together on the couch. She got distracted by her phone, and when she looked away, my son grabbed her headband and poked it into her ear. In a panic, she threw him to the floor to get him off her, which caused him to fall hard. I was still beyond angry at her for obvious reasons. Thankfully, the bleeding from my son's head wasn't serious, but the doctor said he has a concussion from the fall. Unfortunately, the headband hurt my sister's eardrum, and now her hearing is damaged. I'm sure I'll feel worse about it when the anger subsides, but for now, I'm furious. We've paid for all her medical expenses, of course. Naturally, my husband and I told her she needed to move out and that we wouldn't be covering her tuition past this semester, though we won't be pursuing legal action, as the paramedics suggested we could. The issue is now that some family members are saying we're being too harsh. My parents are insisting we should forgive her since it was an accident, and that I shouldn't have trusted her with my son in the first place. But if she didn't want to babysit, she could have said so. She's a grown adult, not an irresponsible teenager, and should know how to stop a toddler from grabbing things they shouldn't. I honestly don't think I'm the bad guy here, but everyone around me seems to think I'm being unreasonable for expecting her to do the basic job of keeping my son safe when I ask. Edit to add, we had only planned to cover her education for 2 years, like my parents did for me. Paying for all 5 years is simply not possible for us. As for food, I usually cook in large batches, so it's not a huge burden for her to eat with us too. Rent isn't an issue since we have a guest room, and as long as she cleans up after herself, there's no problem. I only paid her when she watched my son for longer than 15 minutes, because I know her classes are demanding. I sympathized with her, so I offered her $15 for helping out while I did household chores. These are things I wouldn't have done otherwise. Second edit, to answer some common questions. Yes, I do discipline my son. When he does something he shouldn't, we try to redirect his behavior, scold him, and explain what he did wrong. We take away things he's throwing, but that's about all we can do without spanking, which neither me nor my husband would ever allow. The doctors say my sister's eardrum will heal in 2 to 3 months, and my son should recover in about 4 weeks. I still haven't spoken to her since I told her to move out. According to my parents, though, she's been deeply remorseful about the whole incident and feels terrible for what happened. I'm still too angry to talk to her, so a meeting probably won't happen anytime soon. I destroyed the guy who slept with my wife. Back in the early 2000s, I started having suspicions about my wife. Our 2 kids, ages 4 and 6 at the time, were old enough to talk about their day, and I started noticing a pattern. They began talking about spending a lot of time at my wife's parents' house during the week. It wasn't all that odd, considering they lived about 90 minutes away, but it seemed excessive. She was going there 2 to 3 times a week, practically on every day she wasn't working her part-time job. I asked her about it, but she denied it, though I could tell she wasn't convincing. So I decided to keep track of the mileage on her car, and sure enough, she was putting in an extra 400 miles or so a week. That confirmed my suspicion. Something was off. Then, one day, I was sitting at the computer, and she had left a sticky note with her AOL password on it. I couldn't resist. I logged in and checked her emails. What I found was a conversation between her and her college BFF, where they casually discussed how my wife had been sleeping with one of her ex-boyfriends from high school. There wasn't much detail, just some mocking about how his wife had gotten fat after having kids. I printed those emails and hid them away. I still needed to know more, so I called a friend of mine who was a cop, and he recommended a private investigator named Ron, who had left the force. I hired him, paid his retainer, and gave him everything I had, including the emails and the details I knew. Ron's investigation was thorough. His report, complete with dates, times, photos, and locations, revealed that my wife would take the kids to her parents' house, then meet this guy for lunch, before heading to a rundown motel for a few hours. Afterward, she would pick up the kids and return home, pretending like everything was normal. I was done. I hired a divorce lawyer. My parents' infidelity had ruined my childhood, and I refused to let the same happen to my kids. I also had Ron dig into the guy's background. He found out his name, Bob, and that he was married with 3 kids. He worked as a vice president of sales at his father-in-law's company. Interesting. So, I had my lawyer prepare the divorce papers. I also asked Ron to get me a couple more copies of his report and do one last thing for me. The same day my wife was served with divorce papers at her job, Ron met with Bob's wife and showed her everything he had uncovered. She deserved to know what her husband had been doing. How she chose to use that information was entirely up to her. While the infidelity didn't directly affect my divorce, Bob's life fell apart after his wife found out. According to public court records, she drained their joint account, took the kids, and left him. When her father found out, Bob was fired from his job. To make matters worse, since her parents owned the house where Bob and his wife had been living, he was also evicted. Their divorce was messy, tons of fighting, both in and out of court. Bob even went to the house to confront his wife, but the situation escalated. Her brother stepped in, and Bob ended up with a broken nose. There were restraining orders, more police involvement, criminal charges, and even jail time. I haven't heard from Bob in a long time. I tried searching for him online, but it seems like he vanished. Last I heard, he moved out of state. As for his ex-wife, she did fine. She started working at her father's business and eventually took over when he retired. As for me, my ex and I had a decent enough relationship after the divorce, but it was strictly about the kids. Now that they're both adults, I don't talk to her at all. I don't hate her. But my only concern is that she's my kid's mom, and that's the only connection we have left. How one vegan meal broke our marriage and put my fiancé in jail. Hey Reddit, buckle up, because this is a wild one. I need to get this off my chest, and honestly, I can't believe how things spiraled so badly. Let me set the stage for you with some background. So, my 30M ex-fiancée, Samantha, 29F, and I met about 5 years ago at a mutual friend's party. It was one of those opposites attract kind of stories. She was the loud, vibrant type who could work a room without breaking a sweat, while I was the guy nursing a drink in the corner, hoping no one would make me dance. Somehow, she spotted me, we struck up a conversation, and the rest is history. At first, things were great. Samantha had this magnetic energy that drew me in. She was an event planner and always seemed to know how to make life exciting. I was going through a rough patch when we met. Work stress, family drama, you name it. And she was a rock for me. She'd surprise me with little date nights, encourage me when I doubted myself, and honestly, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. But here's the thing. Samantha had this quirk. She absolutely hated vegan and vegetarian food. Like it wasn't just a preference. She genuinely believed the entire concept of veganism was some kind of propaganda. She'd roll her eyes at anyone who ordered plant-based dishes at restaurants, crack jokes about how they were missing out on real food, and go on long rants about how the vegan movement was a scam. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, right? But then, her disdain started getting personal. My cousin, Liam, 26M, is vegan due to some severe allergies. He can't eat certain animal products because they trigger a condition called eosinophilic esophagitis, EOE. If he consumes the wrong thing, it can cause his throat to swell and lead to long-term complications. Naturally, his diet isn't just a lifestyle choice. It's literally life or death. Samantha knew this, but she never seemed to take it seriously. She'd make snide comments whenever Liam was around like, "Oh look, here comes Mr. Grass Eater," or "Careful Liam, don't breathe near my steak, it might offend you." Liam, being the chill guy he is, usually brushed it off with a laugh, but I could see it bothered him. I tried to talk to Samantha about it a few times. One time, after a particularly nasty remark she made at a family barbecue, I pulled her aside and said, "Look, I get that you're not into the whole vegan thing, but Liam's diet isn't a choice. He has a medical condition, and it's not fair to make fun of him for that." She rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, come on, David. He needs to toughen up. People like him are the reason everyone's so sensitive these days." That turned into our first big fight. I told her she was being cruel and disrespectful, and she accused me of taking sides against her. Things got heated, and she ended up storming off, saying, "If you're so worried about Liam's feelings, maybe you should marry him instead." We didn't talk for 2 days after that. Eventually, we patched things up, but the issue never really went away. Over the years, her attitude towards vegans, and Liam specifically, kept causing friction between us. Another time, we were out at a nice restaurant with friends, and one of them ordered a vegan dish. Samantha made this exaggerated gagging noise and said, "Why even bother coming here if you're just going to eat rabbit food?" I was mortified. Later that night, I told her she'd embarrassed me and made our friends uncomfortable. She brushed it off, saying, "If they can't handle a joke, that's their problem." It felt like we were having the same argument over and over. I kept telling her to be more considerate, and she kept insisting that people needed to toughen up and stop being so sensitive. Eventually, I just gave up. I told myself it wasn't worth the constant fights, and I figured I could live with this one flaw since everything else about her seemed so perfect. I realize now how stupid that was. Fast forward to the months leading up to our wedding. Planning the wedding was stressful, but Samantha was in her element. She'd been dreaming about this day since she was a kid, and she wanted everything to be perfect. I tried to stay out of her way and let her do her thing, but there was one sticking point: Liam's dietary restrictions. Liam had politely asked if there could be a vegan option at the wedding, and Samantha agreed, or so I thought. She smiled and told him, "Of course, I'll make sure there's something special just for you." I was relieved because it seemed like she was finally making an effort to be considerate. Little did I know Samantha had other plans. Looking back, there were red flags I ignored. She made a few offhand comments during the planning, like, "I can't believe I have to cater to Liam's ridiculous needs on my big day," and, "Ugh, this is going to cost us extra just to make him happy." I chalked it up to wedding stress and didn't think much of it. I should have paid more attention. All right, Reddit. Here's where the fairy tale wedding started unraveling like a bad soap opera. The wedding day kicked off beautifully. Samantha had outdone herself with the planning. The venue was this gorgeous vineyard with an open-air ceremony space surrounded by rolling hills and grapevines. The weather was perfect: clear skies, a soft breeze, and just warm enough that no one was sweating in their formal wear. Guests were buzzing with excitement, and the air felt electric. The morning started with laughter and joy. Samantha and her bridesmaids were getting ready in one suite while I hung out with my groomsmen in another. Her closest friends, her sister and her mom, were all there, sipping mimosas and taking endless selfies. Meanwhile, my buddies and I shared some beers, reminisced about old times, and joked about how I was finally getting tied down. The celebrations leading up to the main ceremony had gone off without a hitch. There'd been a welcome dinner the night before, complete with toasts, embarrassing childhood stories, and a lot of laughter. Samantha and I had danced together under twinkling string lights, surrounded by our friends and family. Even Liam seemed to be enjoying himself, despite Samantha's usual jabs. On the wedding day itself, there were little events planned before the ceremony: games for the kids, a photo booth, and even a small dance-off that got everyone laughing. Samantha looked radiant in her dress, glowing with happiness, and I couldn't take my eyes off her. For once, she wasn't making any snide remarks or rolling her eyes. She was just genuinely happy. And then came the vows. Samantha and I were standing at the altar, surrounded by our loved ones. The officiant was walking us through the ceremony, and everything felt surreal. I could see my parents smiling at me, Samantha's mom tearing up, and my friends grinning like idiots. Liam was sitting in the second row with his parents, looking a little pale but otherwise fine. Or so I thought. Halfway through my vows, I noticed Liam shifting uncomfortably in his seat. He leaned over to whisper something to his mom, who glanced at him with concern. I paused for a moment, my words trailing off, and looked over. Liam gave me a weak smile and a thumbs up as if to say, "Don't worry about me, keep going." Samantha, on the other hand, was clearly annoyed. She let out a quiet sigh, just loud enough for me to hear, and muttered, "Can we not make this about him for once?" I shot her a look but decided to focus on finishing my vows. The officiant turned to Samantha and she began her vows with a bright smile. But as she spoke, Liam's condition seemed to worsen. He clutched his stomach, his breathing became shallow, and he started sweating profusely. This time, his mom didn't stay quiet. She leaned forward, whispering frantically to Liam, asking if he was okay. His dad got up, crouching next to him, and soon other family members were crowding around, asking what was going on. Samantha was visibly irritated now. She glanced at the group and said through gritted teeth, "Can't this wait? We're in the middle of something important here." Liam, despite clearly being in distress, waved them off weakly and said, "I'm fine, really. It's just a little stomach thing. Go on." I was torn. Part of me wanted to stop the ceremony and make sure he was okay. But Samantha was giving me this look, the kind that said, "If you stop this wedding for him, we're going to have a problem." So, reluctantly, I let it go. We returned to the altar, but just as Samantha was about to finish her vows, Liam stood up suddenly, swaying like he was about to fall. His dad reached out to steady him, but it was too late. Liam collapsed onto the ground with a loud thud. Chaos erupted. His mom screamed, guests jumped to their feet, and the officiant looked completely lost. Samantha threw up her hands and groaned, "Oh, for God's sake, what now?" Liam's parents were frantic, shouting for someone to call 911. They recognized the signs of his allergy immediately and started asking if he'd eaten anything unusual. His mom yelled, "Did someone serve him animal products? He's allergic. Who gave him non-vegan food?" All eyes turned to Samantha. At first, she played dumb. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, folding her arms defensively. "He asked for vegan food, and I made sure he got it. Maybe he's just overreacting like always." Liam's mom wasn't buying it. "Samantha," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "He only gets this reaction when he's been exposed to something he's allergic to. What did you serve him?" That's when Samantha snapped. She threw her bouquet onto the ground and blurted out, "Fine. You want the truth? I gave him regular food, okay? I thought all this vegan crap was just in his head and I wanted to prove a point." You could hear a pin drop. Then, all hell broke loose. Liam's dad lunged toward Samantha, but someone held him back. His mom was sobbing uncontrollably, yelling, "How could you do this? Do you realize what you've done?" Guests were murmuring, some filming the scene on their phones, while others tried to help Liam, who was barely conscious at this point. Samantha tried to justify herself. "He's been faking it for years. I thought maybe if he ate real food, he'd realize he's fine. I didn't think he'd actually get sick." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Samantha," I said, my voice shaking with anger, "you lied to him. You put his life at risk on purpose. What the hell is wrong with you?" She glared at me, tears streaming down her face. "I did it for us. I didn't want him ruining our wedding with his stupid diet drama." Before I could respond, the paramedics arrived. They rushed Liam to the hospital, and his parents went with him. The ceremony, of course, was over. Samantha stood there, shaking, as our friends and family stared at her in horror. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of her nightmare. When we got to the hospital, the emergency room was chaos. Liam's parents were hysterical, pleading with the doctors to do something, while the rest of us waited in stunned silence. Samantha and I sat on opposite ends of the waiting room. She was still wearing her wedding dress, the hem stained from where she'd knelt on the ground at the venue. Her makeup was smeared, and her expression was a mix of defiance and fear. I couldn't even look at her. Hours passed. Every time a doctor walked through the doors, Liam's parents would jump up, only to be told they'd have to wait a little longer. Finally, the doctor emerged, his face grim. He motioned for Liam's parents, and I followed behind, unable to stop myself. Samantha tried to join us, but Liam's dad shot her a look so venomous she froze in place. The doctor explained that Liam had gone into anaphylactic shock. They'd managed to stabilize him, but the reaction had caused severe damage to his intestines and digestive system. We're looking at permanent consequences here, he said, his tone heavy. He'll likely develop a chronic condition, and eating will never be the same for him. He'll need specialized care and treatment, which will cost upwards of $500,000 over the next few years. Liam's mom broke down, clutching her husband's arm, while his dad just stood there, seething. I could feel my heart sinking with every word. Samantha had done this. She had ruined an innocent man's life over some ridiculous notion that veganism was propaganda. When we returned to the waiting room, Samantha was still sitting there, her hands clenched in her lap. She looked up at me with tear-filled eyes and whispered, "Is he okay?" "Define okay," I snapped. "He's alive, but his life is never going to be the same. He's going to need treatment for the rest of his life, and his parents are looking at $500,000 in medical bills. What the hell were you thinking?" That's when the fight erupted. Samantha jumped to her feet, her voice rising as she tried to defend herself. "I didn't know this would happen. I thought he was exaggerating like he always does. I didn't mean to hurt him." "You didn't mean to hurt him?" I shouted back. "You lied to him, Samantha. You deliberately gave him something you knew he couldn't have, all because you wanted to prove a point. Do you even hear yourself right now?" By now, other people in the waiting room were staring at us. Samantha dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Please, don't do this. I love you. I was trying to make our wedding perfect. I didn't want him ruining it with his stupid drama." I stared at her, disgusted. "You call nearly killing someone stupid drama? You've always hated Liam, and now you've destroyed his life. And for what? So you could have one moment where you felt superior? I can't do this anymore, Samantha. We're done." She clutched at the hem of my suit, sobbing. "Please, don't leave me. We can fix this. I'll apologize. I'll pay for his treatment, whatever it takes. Just don't throw us away." But I couldn't look at her anymore. "It's already gone, Samantha. You did this. You ruined everything." I walked out, leaving her kneeling there in her wedding dress, surrounded by strangers who whispered and shook their heads in pity and judgment. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I'd loved Samantha. Despite all her flaws, I'd believed we could build a future together. But now, every time I thought about her, all I could feel was anger and betrayal. My friends and family tried to support me, but nothing could shake the hollow ache in my chest. Samantha didn't make things any easier. She called me nonstop, leaving voicemails full of apologies and tearful pleas. Her family reached out too, trying to mediate, but I refused to speak to any of them. I needed space, and every reminder of her just reopened the wound. For a while, she and her family backed off. I thought she'd finally accepted that it was over. But then, a few weeks later, Liam was released from the hospital. He was still weak, but he was alive. That's when Samantha decided to make her move. She showed up at my parents' house, uninvited and unwelcome, with a bouquet of flowers and a handwritten letter. "Liam's fine now," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I made a mistake, but I've learned from it. We can move past this. Let's reschedule the wedding and start over." I wanted to scream. Instead, I just stared at her, trying to process the sheer audacity of her words. "Liam's fine?" I repeated, my voice cold. "Do you even hear yourself?" "He's not fine, Samantha. He's going to be dealing with this for the rest of his life. And you think we can just pick up where we left off?" She started to cry again, reaching for my hand. "I love you. I'll never do anything like this again. Please just give me another chance." For a split second, I almost caved. Despite everything, a part of me still loved her. But then I remembered Liam lying unconscious on the floor, his parents screaming for help, and the doctor's words about permanent damage. "No," I said firmly, pulling my hand away. "This is over. You need to leave." She left, sobbing, but that wasn't the end of it. A few days later, Liam's parents filed a police complaint against Samantha for attempted murder. The trial was a media circus. Samantha pleaded innocent, claiming she'd only wanted to help Liam see the error of his ways. Her lawyer argued that it wasn't premeditated, but the evidence was damning. The jury didn't buy her excuses. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison and ordered to pay Liam's medical expenses in full. Now, here I am, months later, trying to piece my life back together. I still can't believe how everything turned out. The woman I thought I'd spend my life with is now behind bars, and the happiest day of our lives became the absolute worst nightmare. Every time I think about Samantha, I feel a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and disbelief. How could someone I loved so deeply do something so horrible? How could she destroy not just her own life, but mine, Liam's, and countless others? I don't know if I'll ever find closure, but one thing's for sure. I'll never forget the day my dreams shattered, leaving nothing but ashes behind. My wife smashed a hot coffee mug on my head because I was late bringing her coffee. She also became abusive during pregnancy and PPD. I'm divorcing her and taking full custody of our son. My wife is accusing me of breaking our marriage. Why can't women take accountability for their actions? I, 29M, was in a relationship with my soon-to-be ex-wife, 28F, for 8 years. Everything was, for the most part, nearly perfect. We had our occasional small arguments, but nothing major or relationship-altering. All of that changed 13 months ago when she got pregnant. The pregnancy wasn't a surprise. We had been actively trying for a baby. Around the 4-month mark, my wife did a complete 180. She changed from the kind, caring, and sweet woman I knew into someone I can only describe as a total tyrant. I know it's harsh to speak about someone that way, but it's the truth. Suddenly, even my breathing was an issue for her. She would wake me up at 2 or 3 in the morning, demanding something specific, and if I refused to drive 40 minutes to get her ice cream, she'd become verbally abusive. One Sunday, she exploded in rage because Chick-fil-A was closed, calling me a useless husband and every name under the sun. She banned me from sleeping in our bed, but if I slept elsewhere, she'd be furious in the morning. Cleaning the house too loudly was wrong. Not cleaning it was also wrong. She'd demand specific meals, then get angry when I cooked what she asked for. I endured it all: the insults, the abuse. I never raised my voice once, even though I was breaking inside. I begged her to seek help, to speak with a doctor, a therapist, or even her mom. But suggesting she needed help only made things worse. She accused me of calling her crazy. I once brought up her mood swings at a doctor's appointment, and the hell I paid for afterward lasted an entire week. Even when I confided in her mother, she acted sweet in front of her and made me look like the crazy one. When I tried to show her mother camera footage of her outbursts, she twisted the narrative, making it seem like I provoked her and was some kind of monster for not doing more to support her. It got to the point where she threw a can at my chest in the middle of the night because she couldn't open a can of peaches on her own. That was somehow my fault too, because I'd fallen asleep at 4 a.m. after hours of trying to calm her. 4 months ago, she gave birth. It wasn't an easy delivery, but I was hopeful things would improve. Instead, she developed severe postpartum depression. I tried even harder to help, researching, making suggestions, and even speaking to a therapist myself to learn how to support her better. But every attempt backfired. She accused me of being against her, of thinking she was a terrible wife and mother, even though I never said any of those things. Then, the abuse turned physical. The breaking point came when she smashed a coffee cup over my head after I took too long to bring her coffee. I had been changing our son's diaper at the time. That was the first time in 8 years I raised my voice at her. I told her we were done and that she needed to pack her things and get out. She tried to take our son with her, but I refused. When she threatened to call the police, I pointed to the hallway camera and said she was welcome to try. The footage clearly showed her attacking me. A week later, I was served divorce papers. I had wanted to file first, but didn't have the time between work and taking care of our son alone. 3 weeks ago, I came home to find my in-laws waiting for me. Apparently, her parents had finally forced her to see a therapist, threatening to kick her out when she became abusive toward them as well. They finally believed me and realized I wasn't lying about what I'd endured. They handed me a letter from her before leaving. In the letter, she apologized for everything she put me through, admitting she had no excuse. She wrote that she's been seeing both a therapist and a psychiatrist and is now on medication. She mentioned that she halted the divorce proceedings and wants to give our marriage another chance. I haven't responded to her letter. Instead, I gave it to my lawyer and instructed her to proceed with the divorce. The letter contains detailed admissions of her behavior, which support my case for custody. I also have the videos showing the coffee cup assault, my hospital visit for stitches, and the burn marks from the hot coffee. People have called me an asshole for not giving her another chance. They say she's getting the help she needs now and that I should forgive her for the sake of our family. They claim that if I truly loved her, I'd be able to move past everything she did while she wasn't in her right mind. I've even been accused of being a monster who doesn't understand what she's gone through. But here's the thing. I tried everything to help her. I did everything humanly possible. She refused, made me out to be the villain, and made my life a living hell. Nothing I did was right or good enough. Even when I tried to remove myself from volatile situations, I was somehow still in the wrong. I've built a strong case for full custody of our son, and my lawyer is optimistic. There are no guarantees, but she believes a judge will grant it. My prenuptial agreement also protects my assets, including our house. Just to clarify, my son is biologically mine. Before he was born, I combed through my wife's messages, financial records, and anything else that could raise red flags. I found nothing suspicious, and a paternity test confirmed he's my son. Am I the asshole for choosing to proceed with the divorce and refusing to give our marriage another chance? My brother-in-law accused that my 5-year-old boys will become a sexual predator just because my wife's father was one. Mom canceled him for Thanksgiving, and now my sister is accusing me of breaking our family. I'm a 35-year-old dad to 5-year-old identical twin boys. They're full of energy and constantly keep my wife and me on our toes. We're currently expecting our 3rd child, a girl, which we're excited about since this will be our last baby. My wife is an amazing mom, but she's endured a difficult past. During her childhood, her father abused her, which led to him being imprisoned. Because of this, my wife is particularly protective of our kids, wanting to make sure they grow up safe and loved, a complete contrast to her own upbringing. While she still maintains some contact with her mom, they're not particularly close. Despite everything she's been through, my wife has always been devoted to our sons, loving them unconditionally. My older sister, who's 38, has 2 daughters and is married to a guy named Sean. Although I care about my sister, her husband has a habit of making offhand, inconsiderate remarks. My wife doesn't often discuss her trauma, but our family is aware of it, partly because her mother has spoken openly about what happened. My parents and siblings have always been supportive and understanding, but Sean has made some unsettling comments in the past. For instance, before our wedding, he once told me it was admirable that I was willing to be with someone who had so much baggage. I never mentioned that to my wife. Last night, we were having dinner at my sister's house. My wife was in great spirits, excited to share the news that we're having a daughter. My sister was thrilled, but Sean, after congratulating us, said he was relieved we weren't having another boy. I asked him what he meant, and he explained that having a girl minimized the risk of something turning out wrong. Confused, I pushed for clarification. That's when he turned to my wife and asked if she ever worried about passing down her family's issues. My wife was stunned and said her father's behavior had nothing to do with our kids. But Sean insisted there's a genetic component, implying our sons might inherit their grandfather's tendencies. My wife asked how he could say such things about our innocent boys, but Sean doubled down, saying her father had also once been a sweet, innocent child. At that point, my wife broke down, sobbing, and I was furious. My sister defended Sean, admitting his comment was insensitive, but arguing that he wasn't wrong. She claimed they weren't accusing our kids of anything, but thought it was something to keep in mind. I wanted to lash out at Sean, but my wife begged me to leave with the boys. She cried the entire ride home, and I tried to reassure her, reminding her that our sons are nothing like her father. She said she knew that, but the judgment from family was heartbreaking. As we talked about it, we realized that Sean has always been uneasy around our boys, especially when they're playing near his daughters. One incident stood out. The kids were having a pillow fight, and one of my sons accidentally hit his cousin. He felt terrible, immediately apologized, and even started crying because he didn't mean to hurt her. But Sean scolded him harshly, calling him aggressive. At the time, it seemed like an overreaction, but now it feels like he's always assumed the worst of our boys. This morning, I called my mom and explained what happened. She was shocked and agreed that Sean's comments were out of line. I told her that my wife, being pregnant, needed peace, and if my sister and Sean were attending Thanksgiving, we'd sit it out. My mom, angry about how her grandsons were judged, said she supported us and didn't want Sean at Thanksgiving. My sister called me later, angry that we were causing a rift. She said Sean was just voicing his concerns as a father to 2 daughters, and accused us of taking it the wrong way. She also argued it wasn't fair for her daughters to miss Thanksgiving because of what he said. But I told her our sons were being unfairly judged for something beyond their control. She asked me to convince our mom to change her mind, but I refused. So, am I in the wrong? My dad died when I was 6, and my mom forced me to take my stepfather's name. When I refused, they promised to help me change it back when I turn 18. Now, both of them are stopping me from changing it. AITA for cutting off ties with my mother and stepdad. My dad passed away when I was 6 years old. At that time, my parents had already separated, and my mom was in a relationship with the man she would later marry. After my dad's death, they decided to get married to create a complete family unit for me. A few months later, they sat me down and explained that they wanted to change my last name to my stepfather's. My mom said it would make things easier for her husband, like handling school matters or medical situations where having the same last name might be helpful. I was devastated and told them I wanted to keep my dad's last name. I said that my stepfather wasn't my dad, and that I didn't want to lose the last piece of my father I had left. I even cried, pleading to keep it. My mom and stepfather repeatedly promised me that once I turned 17 or 18, they would pay for me to change my name back. They said it was only temporary, just to make life simpler while I was a kid. I regretted agreeing to the name change almost immediately, but I held on to their promise. For years, I believed they would follow through. About a year ago, when I brought it up, my mom brushed it off, saying there was no need to rush. I insisted that I wanted my original last name back before graduation, so it could be on my diploma. We argued a lot, and my stepfather chimed in, acting like it wasn't a big deal. He even pointed out that I'd had his last name for longer than I'd had my dad's, but I told him that didn't matter. I wanted my actual dad's name back. Finally, my mom admitted they weren't going to help me change it back. She said I should keep my stepfather's name since he'd done so much for me. I told her it wasn't her choice anymore and that I would do it as soon as I turned 18. I also told her our relationship would never be the same because of how she broke her promise and let me down. She dismissed me as being overdramatic, but from that point on, I became distant and cold, shutting both of them out as much as I could. My mom kept trying to reconnect, but I wouldn't let her. I moved out as soon as I could and started living with my cousin. The day after I turned 18, I filed to get my name changed back. My mom found out through other relatives and tried to stop me, even falsely claiming that my stepfather had adopted me, which would prevent the name change. But I checked and confirmed that wasn't true. When she confronted me, she accused me of disrespecting her and my stepfather. That's when I snapped and told her to shut up. I said she was a liar and that I didn't care about her opinion on this matter. She started crying, and I told her good. I made it clear that she had lost me because of her broken promises and that she'd have to deal with the consequences. Now some extended family members are siding with her, saying I was too harsh. My mom insists I had no reason to speak to her that way. So am I the jerk?